Welcome to the Larry Kreider's Leadership Podcast. Larry is the author of over 40 books, the founder of Dove International, a worldwide family of churches and ministries in 6 continents, and has over 50 years of leadership experience. He and his guests will share inspirational leadership insights from their journey with God. These insights, gleaned from serving leaders in many nations, will transform your life and leadership. For more information on Larry's books and resources, visit LarryKreider.com.
Welcome to the Larry Kreider Leadership Podcast. Larry Kreider here with the podcast this week. And with me in the studio today is my good friend, Dave Smith. Welcome, Dave.
Thanks, Larry. It's so good to be here.
Yeah, it's so good to have you. You and Alyssa have been missionaries for many years in New Zealand, and I want to hear all these stories. You've got a ton of stories that you can tell us about leadership and what to do, what not to do. Yes. So let's go back to the beginning. When you were growing up, did you have an idea you'd be involved in leadership of some kind? Did you have that kind of a call in your life?
Yeah, good question. My dad was always, at first he was a preacher, and then he became a pastor. So
right.
Kind of grew up in the church, having a good example of seeing, mostly what to do for my dad.
Right.
We won't go into what not to
right.
do. But I always was able to be involved with church and kind of see how it all works from the inside out.
Now, where did you go? Did you grow up in New Zealand?
No, I grew up in San Diego.
San Diego,
California.
Beautiful area. Wow.
Beautiful place. Yep.
Yeah.
Weather is amazing, and you can't beat the prices out there. Yeah. No, not really. Yeah.
I remember being out there a couple months back, and everything was really expensive in that part of the world. But beautiful area. Yep. So you grew up there, and how did you come to Christ? How did that happen? Were you really young?
Yeah. I think I came to Christ when I was about 8. I remember just in a church service, and I always knew of God, Larry, growing up in the church, and I actually went to a Christian high school and things like that. But when I got to university, I was pretty much at a place where I had my whole life planned out. And I was getting ready to be a Christian school teacher or a pastor. I had a girl that I was thinking I was going to marry.
Yeah.
And one day, just out of nowhere, the Lord just spoke to me very clearly for the first time. And he said to me, "Dave, I love you and I love what you're doing, but you never took a chance to ask me what I wanted to do with your life."
Oh, wow. That's a key to leadership. There you go. Whoa.
Man. Yeah, it just wrecked me. And so I ended up trying to evaluate.
This was like a strong impression you
Just
had?
a real strong impression,
God was speaking.
Of conviction, really.
Yeah.
Not condemnation, but just a real conviction of the Lord. You never really involved me in this. And I thought because I was going to do some ministry or something good, that obviously God must be in it.
Right.
But I realized I was kind of trying to take control of my own life.
Sure.
And so I evaluated and kind of asked the Lord, lead me into what you want me to have. And ended up meeting this one person that said, "Hey, I'm going to go do this thing called YWAM, going to do a discipleship training school." And something just kind of started beating in my heart.
Had you heard of that before?
I'd never heard of it before.
Interesting.
Never heard of it, except for in the book No Compromise by Keith Green, which was one of my favorite books
way
of all
back,
time.
Yeah.
And so I looked it up and ended up, I felt like I was supposed to go to Australia when I was 18 years old.
Interesting.
Take a leave of absence from school. I went and tried to butter my parents up by taking them out to Denny's. And
you took them to Denny's?
I took them to
wow.
Denny's. I took, wine and dined them, and I said, "Guys, I think I'm going to stop school for a little bit and go and take a discipleship training school in Australia." My poor mom started crying, "My son's going to be homeless." And my dad was a little bit more supportive, of the decision. But it ended up just changing the course of my life.
And you went to New Zealand?
I went to Australia at first. And then that was in year 2001.
Okay, gotcha.
2001.
And which part of Australia?
Townsville, Australia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was your DTS?
Real Crocodile Dundee area.
Wow.
Everything there can kill you, But I thought I was going for 6 months. Ended up staying for 5 years, and just a beautiful time.
Wow. So, growing up, you had some inclination that you're going to be involved in leadership. You thought it'd be a pastor or whatever. You weren't quite sure. And so how did that change you being there? And by the way, anybody listening right now, if you want to know more about YWAM, you want to know about Dave and Alyssa Smith and their ministry, it's all in the show notes. Check that out. We'll make sure all that's on there.
Yes.
And also, I don't want to forget to say that Dave, you are an author also. You're one of 24 voices reflecting in missions today in a book called Evolving Missions, compiled by Peter Bunton and Hilary Vargas. You got the very first chapter, 3 chapters in this book. So check out this book. Check out the show notes. Evolving Missions, 24 voices. Great book. So talk more about leadership, things that you were thinking about during those days.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I'd always seen leadership from afar, and I think as a young person, you have a lot of energy and a lot of zeal.
Right.
And, I remember, especially as an American, we have a little bit of a mindset sometimes when you're going overseas to do missions. You kind of feel like a superhero,
Right.
I'm going to save the world,
Right.
And I remember God very gently kind of guiding me in that and going, well, I'm the one that's actually going to save the world. But if you'd like to be a part of it,
sure.
I'd love you to be a part of it.
Sure.
So I remember one of the most eye-opening experiences at first was as a 19-year-old leading a outreach team to rural Thailand.
Wow.
And the team that I was given, amazing people, but man, they had some had some issues. We had one person that had cerebral palsy pretty bad, so there was some mobility issues. We had one guy who just before the outreach had finalized a divorce, so he was a bit of a wreck. We had one person that had manic depression, and she forgot to take her medication as we got to Thailand.
No.
So we had this just conglomeration of a lot of different things kind of coming together all at once. And the place where we were staying in Thailand had no running water, no electricity, and squatty potties.
Wow.
So as a 19-year-old you have a lot of energy, but maybe not a whole lot of wisdom to deal with those things. And I remember afterwards being very thankful that God led us into that situation to realize that there's very little I can do, but if we do say yes to the Lord, He will lead us. And it's interesting with that team of amazing but very broken people. We ended up speaking to hundreds of schools about Jesus Christ. Some of them the Buddhist run, and we saw a lot of people come to know Christ who had never heard the name of Christ before.
That's amazing.
So it's pretty amazing how God leads us.
God uses anyone, if we're just willing to be used, even though we're very broken, we understand that He'll still use us to see His kingdom built.
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, one other story, in that same vein.
I love to hear your stories.
There's a nation called Vanuatu, very very small island nation in the middle of the Pacific.
Yeah, when I spent time in New Zealand, there'd be a lot of people from Vanuatu be in New Zealand.
That's correct. That's correct. And we got an opportunity, a different outreach team. I think I was 18 or 20 at the time, somewhere around there. And we went from village to village, just praying for people, praying for healing, and whatnot. And they always loved us to come to the front of their church and pray. It was that whole healing line.
Right.
Growing up in a Lutheran church, healing wasn't something that we talked about a lot, growing up. And so we had a team of 3 guys and 13 girls. And the girls were always, real energetic about, yes, let's heal, let's pray, And I have to admit, I was the one that kind of tried to sneak in behind the girls, pretend like I was praying just to look spiritual, but didn't really feel comfortable praying for somebody. So there was this one village where this was taking place again. I was trying to hide behind my girls, being very manly in this.
Right.
And I just so happened to look up as I was praying, and this guy at the back of the room made eye contact with me, big smile, and he just making a beeline straight for me. And I thought, oh no, here we go. And as he got closer, I noticed his arm had a real defect in it, kind of shriveled up. He couldn't do anything except for hold it close to his chest. So anyways, he got next to me and he was asking in his native language, could you please pray for me for healing? And so I had this moment of, okay, so either I can run away and hide and try not to encounter this opportunity, or I can just do whatever I can to just put my hand on him and pray and hope that God would show up. So the only thing I really knew how to do at that point in terms of healing was I remembered watching Benny Hinn back in the day on televangelist, And so I tried to conjure up my inner Benny Hinn there, and I know we're on a podcast. I'll try not to be as loud as I was that day, but I put my hand on his shoulder and I just said, "In the name of Jesus, be healed," and to nobody's surprise, nothing happened, And I just thought, man, I don't know if I have what it takes to be a missionary. I just don't have it.
Sure.
Long story short, the next morning we found out his village was going to come back to the village we were staying at. And I thought, oh no, I'm going to see this guy again. And he's going to try to, ask me to pray for him. And sure enough, he showed up with his village. They came to our village for breakfast. And he comes up to me and he's speaking Bislama in his native language. And I can't understand anything he's saying, but at least he doesn't hate me and he's shaking my hand. And then he left. And I thought, okay, well, at least he doesn't hate me. That's good. And then two members from my team and the translator for our team came up to me and they said, "Dave, did he tell you what happened?" And I said, well, he tried to, but I don't speak Bislama very well. And they said, well, this is what happened. They said, after you prayed for him that night, he went back to his village and he had a dream. And in his dream, you were praying for his arm again in the dream. But this time, God showed up, and God placed his hand over top of your hand, and in his dream, his arm was healed.
Wow.
But the next morning, the crazy thing was he woke up and his arm was completely healed in real
Praise
life.
God.
Now, he came with his village, and this hand he was shaking my hand with was his actual healed hand. And,
Wow.
And in my just feeling sorry for myself and thinking I didn't have what it took to be a missionary, I did not realize that the healing had taken place and his healed hand was shaking my hand. And I realized in that moment, being a leader, being a missionary, being in ministry, there's very little that God requires of us.
Right.
What he really requires is saying a simple yes and being obedient to follow through in it.
That is so good. So key to leadership is saying yes to God. And whatever he asks us to do, we say, Lord, we're trusting you to do it through us. And God does it. Wow. 100%. Now, somewhere along the line, you met Alyssa. How did that happen?
Yeah, I did. I met Alyssa when I was in Australia, in Townsville.
Okay.
It's another story for another day, but as soon as I shook her hand after she got off the plane, I felt like God said, this is who you're going to marry.
Really?
My response at that point, I wasn't really looking into getting into a relationship. My response at that point was, get behind me, Satan. This must not be from God. I told her afterwards, not when I first met her. Yeah. But we ended up being friends for 4 years.
Wow.
And we moved back to the States to get married. And we asked God, do you want us to go to California, where we're from, where I'm from, to Florida, where Alyssa's from, or to Australia? And to our surprise, God said, move to Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Wow.
So that's how we got to Pennsylvania.
That's amazing. Weren't you in a band?
Oh, yes.
Was that in Pennsylvania?
That was in Pennsylvania, yes. Yep.
Wow. So what did you learn about leadership by being in the band?
Patience.
Uh-huh.
No. Yeah, it was good. We did a band for about 4 years in Pennsylvania. We got to play at Creation, and
did you? That's fantastic.
Yeah, I got to tour around the East Coast a bit.
That's fantastic.
We actually, the whole point of doing the band in the first place was to support another Dove missionary, Justin and Rowan Shrum, with the Justice Project, and we got to raise some money for them, and as they were starting up. So that was a great experience.
Speaking of Dove Missions, DMI, Dove Mission International, you're about a part of that, along with many other missionaries. And I just want all our listeners to know, if you want to know more about missions, to know more about practical missions, check the show notes. Dove Mission International is on there. Peter Bond and his team will do all they can to help you find your way in missions, whatever that looks like. So let's continue this journey. You and Alyssa now, you're married. Let's continue this journey. Tell us more stories. I love your stories.
Yeah. So we moved up to Lancaster. We only knew one couple that we had known from Australia, actually. And the guy, his name is Matt Thomas, and his wife's Natalie Thomas.
I know them well.
Yeah, and they were living in Lancaster County. Mm-hmm. So my whole life, I never lived anywhere that had this white stuff that fell from the sky called snow. So we moved up in February of all months.
Welcome to snow time.
I thought, man, I've always wanted to do ministry. We just did missions. I must obviously be stepping back into ministry, and God led us actually to a job at a wastewater plant here in Lancaster City. Believe it or not, I learned a lot about leadership from working at that job.
Talk about that.
Yeah, it was interesting. You kind of live around blue collar workers and cursing and whatnot. But it was the day in, day out, just the discipline of coming, doing your job, realizing that, ministry doesn't have to happen in a church or on a mission field. Ministry can happen right next door, or even at the wastewater plant. Right. And to be really honest with you, I remember there's different stages. And if you don't know what a wastewater plant is, basically if you have a toilet and you flush it, it goes down to the wastewater plant. We have to make sure that the water, before it goes back into the river or the receiving water is clean, Thank God we have those.
Right, exactly.
But I remember one day doing a fairly dirty job, and I'll save the listeners, too many details on it. But watching what comes through the sewers, I was watching it, and I remember crying out to the Lord after about 5 years of doing this job, and I just said, God, I feel so far away from doing ministry. I just feel so far away from everything that I think I should be doing right now. And in God's humor, he just kind of looked down and he said, Dave, you are doing ministry. This is where I've placed you for this time and place. Right. And he says, sometimes doing ministry is dealing with other people's crap.
There you go.
And
there you go.
I thought I heard a rim shot, as he was kind of talking about this. But it just was a real big revelation, I guess I'd say, that, hey, I need to be faithful in the small with what I've been given right now. You know, we talk about sometimes don't despise the small beginnings, you know, or you know, small what we would consider small callings.
Right.
But I think oftentimes God, as He prepares you for a leadership position, a lot of times He's bringing in the integrity, you know, and the consistency that you need. You know, when I was a young person, it was that whole energy of going, let's do this, let's go, let's do this. You know? But I think as I've gotten older, I've realized leadership is a lot more about perseverance, you know, and actually dealing with the day-to-day than it is, you know, going and doing these grand things.
Yeah, so you're talking about leadership in many levels here. You're talking about leadership first as a missionary, talk about leadership at the waste management plant, leadership in a band.
Yes.
So what other principles did you learn during those early years? And we're going to later get into, you know, what happened next and going to New Zealand and all that.
Sure.
But what kind of truths or principles did you learn in leadership that help younger leaders today?
Yeah, definitely. I think as a younger leader, or, you know, somebody that has somewhat of a natural ability to lead other people, sometimes we have the tendency to think, I can do this by myself. You know, you know, I have the skills or I have the talents. And I've always been a bit blessed that I've been pretty good at most things I've put my hand to. But the principle is that, you know, even if you're a star baseball player, you still need a coach to maximize your talents. You know? And I think I realized from the point from when I was a younger leader to as I was becoming, you know, maybe a bit more of a mature leader in my 20s or whatnot, I really needed a coach. I really needed a mentor. You know, and with that, picking the right one too. You know, oftentimes we want to pick somebody that we know is going to be easy on us. You know. But we don't really maximize, you know, who we are and our talents if we just get somebody that tells us everything we want to hear. You know, so we need to identify somebody. Maybe it's not even in the situation. You know, if you're a missionary, maybe it's a pastor back home who's not involved in the actual ministry that you're doing, so they can offer a fresh voice.
So did God give you that?
He did.
I mean, often we have more than one mentor. We have many mentors too in different seasons of life, and that's important too.
Absolutely.
But talk about that. How that worked for you?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I always had parents who were Christians that I could go to and be able to. But, you know, parents, as well-meaning as they are, oftentimes have a bit of a stake in the game.
They do. They're biased. So
obviously, a little bit biased.
This is their child.
Yes, that's right. You know, they love us, you know, for some reason sometimes. But yeah, you know, I had this pastor, especially when we got to Lancaster. His name was Tom Barnett, and he was just a real godsend for me. Learned so many principles from him.
He's an amazing pastor.
Amazing guy. You know, amazing guy.
And he was a missionary for years too, which helped you also probably.
Exactly. And I had this other guy who I think you've probably had on the podcast before, Steve Prokopchek. He used to drive me bananas because, as we were about to talk about, I've had this dream to go to New Zealand for 15 years before we went, and I kept telling Steve, you know, when is it going to happen, Steve? When is this going to happen? And he just, in his wise way, he just kept saying, like, it'll happen when it's meant to happen. You know? I said, Steve, come on, give me some actual wisdom here, you know. And it's kind of like when you're trying to figure out who you're going to marry, and somebody says, you'll just know when it's right.
Thanks.
It's a true statement, but at the time you just want to strangle that person.
Good. So talk then about the next part of this journey. How did you get back into missions? You're in this plant. I mean, all this stuff's going on, and God's showing you that's ministry right now for you, and that's so powerful, so important. I go, what we're doing in life, that's ministry. And we often talk about full-time ministry. We think either a pastor who's supported by the church, or we think of a missionary supported by, you know, supporters or whatever. But we're all in full-time ministry. It's just that different people pay the bills, you know, write the checks, so we help us live.
That's right.
So we're all in full-time ministry in a way. So talk about the next step of this journey for you and Alyssa.
Yeah, definitely. So once we had moved to Lancaster, you know, as I was working at the wastewater plant, I kept thinking back to when I was 18 and I had first step foot in this nation called New Zealand. Now, in the Pacific, two of the biggest, you know, countries are Australia, which is where we had been, and then New Zealand. And then you have 7,000 different Pacific islands. So it's a vast amount of land, even though it's in the middle of this nowhere Pacific, you know. So anyways, when I had stepped foot in New Zealand, I felt like God spoke a very specific thing. And he said, I want to bring hope to the Pacific in a new way. It's just something that resonated with me over the years, and I couldn't forget that statement. So we were in Lancaster, and we kept having these little confirmations along the way of New Zealand. Somebody would write a prophetic word, and I'd get really excited and show my wife, and she'd just smile and say, "That's nice, dear. It's not the right timing," you know. And I'd say, "Are you sure?" You know? we just kept having these different confirmations to the one point where we had to go and stay at our neighbor's house one time, and it was during a snowstorm and our power got knocked out, and we went in there, and as God does, he uses his humor to speak to us in different ways. And I went to the restroom, and in his restroom he had a magazine, and his magazine had this ship, this medical ship on the front of it, and it said it's called the Pacific Hope. And I thought, I'm really intrigued by that, considering the phrase that had been going over and over in my head. So I started reading this magazine, and I found out it was in New Zealand. And so I took one step further than that, and I looked on the website, and turns out it's in Tauranga, New Zealand, this medical ship called the Pacific Hope. And so I got really excited, and I showed Alyssa, and she smiled at me again, and my wife Alyssa. She said, "That's nice, dear. You know, in the right timing, we'll go."
Sure.
At this point, we had 2 kids, and we're looking at pretty substantial giving up a lot of things if we were going to go to missions again. So a few weeks after that, we were at our little church in Dove Elizabethtown in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And our pastor, who I just mentioned, Tom Barnett, he got sick right before the service. And one of the eldership came up to me and said, "Is there anything you'd like to share today? Because we don't have any message planned." And so I said, "Yeah, sure. I can talk a little bit about God's faithfulness." And anyways, without asking my wife, I decided to talk about New Zealand and the things along the way that he had spoken. And she kind of gave me the evil eye from the corner. But as I was preaching this message, from the bottom of my heart, there was a visitor that day who decided that he wanted to say something in the middle of my message. Sure. So he walked up to the front of the church and he asked for the microphone. And I thought, oh, this is a little bit awkward, but sure, why not? And he took the microphone and he says, "Hi, David. My name is Mike Mears. I'm from Tauranga, New Zealand. I'm just visiting today, but I'm actually the national director of YWAM Ships in New Zealand. I work on the Pacific Hope, so I think we should probably talk after the service."
Wow.
And I started crying, and I looked over at my wife, and she was crying. And I thought, yes, the timing is right.
That is amazing.
Yeah. So that really expedited our journey into New Zealand. And we talked about perseverance. We sold everything. We got ready to go in 2016 to New Zealand, and we showed up. And a few months after we showed up in New Zealand, the Pacific Hope actually became the Atlantic Hope. It moved. Oh, wow. And so we started thinking, okay, Lord, did we hear wrong? What's going on? And through a long series of events, we found out, no, we didn't hear wrong. We were in New Zealand. We got to be involved quite a bit with the indigenous people groups there in New Zealand, the Maori. Got to see the amazing thing that God was doing and weaving together 2 very diverse cultures deeper into who he is. And then very randomly, a couple years ago, we got a phone call involved with this base called YWAM Furnace in Tauranga, New Zealand. And we got a phone call from a gentleman who said he'd like to donate his ship to our ministry. And so we did a little bit more digging, and we found out it was a $4 million ship. Wow. That he was wanting to give to our base, to our ministry, to use for medical purposes. Now, this gentleman was not a Christian. He had a wife who had become a Christian just before she died, and her dying wish was that this ship would be able to use for the kingdom of God in some way.
Wow, that's amazing.
And so through this process, he donated a $4 million ship with a full tank of gas and actually more money on the side to go to start this new ship ministry. And when I say ship ministry, what we do is we provide medical care in optical and dental and some primary health care to some of the remote islands in the Pacific that don't have access to getting to a doctor very easily. And through that meeting of a practical need, we're often able to share spiritual needs in terms of telling them about Jesus and offering them why we do what we do. So it's just been this amazing process of God's faithfulness over the years. And in terms of being a leader in that kind of respect, really, again, it comes back to what I said earlier of just the simple saying of yes, God, yes, we will go, yes, we will do what you've called us to do. And I'm not a medical professional, Alyssa's not a medical professional, but we've used our leadership and our experience to this point to be able to help with administrative work, to meeting with business owners, meeting with politicians, to open up avenues for the ship to be able to go to Fiji in about 7 days.
Wow,
which is amazing.
That is an amazing story. So as you look back over your life, so thus far, what are some things you would have done differently? Say, I wish I would have done differently. Are there some things that, or maybe you did it all right? One of those perfect people.
Yes, we can end the podcast right now. Didn't do anything wrong. Yeah, like I said.
What would you change?
I would go back to a young David, and I would say, identify a mentor earlier. Okay. Identify somebody that isn't going to just sugarcoat things. Yeah. And it's actually going to walk with you in this. So yeah, I've definitely tried to do things on my own a lot more than I should have. And I think the other thing too, to be really honest with you, and especially having a young family now, I think we're realizing the importance of having boundaries.
Right.
And yes, it's good and well to have good stories from, doing missions or doing ministries or whatnot. But it's so important to really be looking after your family, looking after loved ones, and really most importantly, looking after yourself.
Right.
Because we can really easily burn out if we don't have proper boundaries in our life.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. Wow. This is so refreshing. Do you find some, you've been in leadership in New Zealand, and you are a leader wherever you go. Do you see differences today in leadership than you would have seen like 10 years ago, 20 years ago?
Yeah, I think
to that.
I think if you would have asked me this maybe 3 years ago, I would say I think it's pretty similar. But I think, man, I'll tell you what, over the last 2 or 3 years, especially with this whole COVID incident coming across the earth, people have become a lot less interested in doing things outside the house. There's so many things vying for our attention right now. Be it social media or the news or television. I mean, just even in the word itself, television. So you're communicating a vision, Right. Man, I'll tell you what, the enemy loves the fact that there's so many things vying for our attention. Right. And, what we focus on really is what we become. William Blake said it in the 18th century, a poet for an 18th century. He said, "We become what we behold."
Wow, that's true.
And I think about my iPhone, and it's a real blessing in a lot of ways. But I remind myself in saying, I'm beholding my phone,
Yeah.
And if I ever forget, if I'm starting to feel anxious or whatnot, I think about Philippians 4:6. Don't be anxious in anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, present your request to God, and the peace that passes all understanding. Yeah. God, he talks about there at that point.
Keep your heart right with Christ.
Yeah, and so I think we've become so focused on what the current rules of COVID or what's not happening or what we can or can't do. We really forget that Revelation 4, that beauty of God in his throne room and what's happening in heaven and how Jesus, when he taught us to pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Jesus is telling us we through leadership, through ministry, through missions, our focus really needs to be on creating the kingdom of heaven here on earth. This is our practice run. Basically,
True.
And that heaven is a fully functioning society, and everything that we're doing isn't just onto salvation; it's onto creating heaven here on earth. And so I know we were talking about leadership and what we wouldn't do and whatnot, but I think that's probably the biggest thing I'd go back and tell 18-year-old David, is hey Dave, just open up the Bible there. Let's focus on the Lord. Don't be anxious. Don't worry about the next bills coming in. Don't worry about this next ministry. Don't worry about being in rural Thailand with no running water. Just focus on the Lord. Just focus on Jesus and the beauty of who he is, and everything will really come to pass from that. Yeah.
And looking back in all of our lives, we've all done things we would do differently today. But Romans 8:28 is still true.
Yes.
All things still work together for good to those who love God.
Yes.
And those called according to his purpose. So God weaves all these things in our lives into his purposes in amazing ways.
Yes.
Dave, while time has gone so fast, one of the authors, 24 Voices on Evolving Missions, his book on missions. Thank you for your insights on that. And again, this is on the show notes. You can pick this up, compiled by Peter Bunton and Hilary Vargas. And I think you've got 3 different chapters in there. A lot of insight you've got in this book. Thank you for writing that. And so that's available. And if you want to know more about Dave, Alyssa, more about what they're doing, what they're up to for the future, of course, you're going to be back in New Zealand here in a couple of weeks. Back in leadership, again, leadership with Youth of the Mission there. And for this next season of your life. So you want to get a hold of them, check the show notes. It's all in the show notes. We've got information about Dove Mission International on there, Youth with a Mission, whatever you need to take you the next leg of your journey. Any last thoughts that you want to share with younger leaders? Any small things they could change that would make a huge difference in their lives in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've gone through a crazy period of history, but the time is now to go. Projections are by 2033 we can actually fulfill the Great Commission of reaching every culture and having the Bible translated into every language.
Yes.
And I think God would say, let's go. Let's not stay in our rooms and worry about safety. Let's go. And, let's just say that simple yes to the Lord.
Yeah, amen.
Yeah.
Dave Smith, thank you. Thank you so much for being here and sharing all these leadership insights on the Larry Kreider Leadership Podcast. Again, check out the show notes for everyone who's listening today from the different nations around the world. And we look forward to seeing you again real soon. God bless you all. Have an amazing day in the Lord.
Thank you for listening to Larry Kreider's Leadership Podcast. If you want more information about any of Larry's books, daily devotionals, small group resources, or any other teachings, go to larrykreider.com.